On Saturday, August 29th. Today speaking is going to be Chief John Iwanciw, followed next by Mayor Joseph DeStefano, and then District Attorney Dave Hoovler, and also a representative from the State Police, one of the captains. I just ask, I do have a formal press release that I'm going to pass out for you guys to have an update on the facts of the investigation thus far. We will allow questions at the end of the press conference. I just ask that you silence your phones and just give your attention to Chief Iwanciw.
Good afternoon, all. Thank you for coming and joining us today. As you all know, the purpose of our meeting today is to discuss the officer-involved shooting that occurred this past Saturday, August 29th. It was just before 8 p.m. On August 29th, I received a phone call from my desk lieutenant with news that, as a police chief, you never want to hear, that there's an officer-involved shooting and one of your officers has been shot. Unfortunately, I was out of town, so my ride back to town was a very, very long ride, wondering what was going on, how my officer was, and the circumstances of the situation. But I was rest assured that I had great staff on scene and that the situation was going to be handled correctly. So I'm just going to walk you through what actually occurred on the night of August 29th. On Saturday, August 29th, approximately 7:42 p.m., Officer Evan Barone, who was assigned to the Neighborhood Enhancement Unit, was patrolling his ward of assignment. As part of the Neighborhood Enhancement Unit, he was assigned to the 2nd and 4th wards of the city, and in doing so, he is to patrol the areas, interact with the community, the residents, and address the problems within that community. As he was patrolling Myrtle Avenue, he was waved down by a resident of number 28 Myrtle Avenue. He had no idea what the person was waving them down for. He stopped his car, he exited his car, and as he was trying to navigate through why he was being stopped, he was shot at by a person from the porch of that house. From the moment that Officer Barone exited his car, it was approximately 25 seconds before he was shot at. Within that 25 seconds, the fight for his life began. He immediately returned fire, striking the individual. He realized that he was shot. He did an outstanding job knowing those circumstances, knowing he was by himself. He communicated to our dispatch requesting assistance. He assessed his own situation, realized that yes, he was shot, but he was still able to control himself, control the situation, and that's exactly what he did. His warrior instincts kicked in that day. All of his training kicked in that day. He reverted to everything that he's been taught from the time he went through the police academy, right up and through our continued training that we train on a yearly basis. Under those circumstances, as I said, Officer Barone took control of the situation. It was a very chaotic situation. It wasn't just the person that waved down Officer Barone. There's numerous people on scene. The shooter was on the porch of the residence, along with several other individuals, and there's several other individuals on the ground in and around Officer Barone trying to direct information at him to give his story. So his attention was diverted in multiple directions that day. So once again, I go back to the outstanding job that he did under those circumstances. As I said, it was 25 seconds from the moment that Officer Barone exited his car until he was involved in the fight for his life. The next minute and 3 seconds was probably the longest minute and 3 seconds of Officer Barone's life as well, as he waited for assistance. And during that time, he maintained control of the situation. As I've mentioned, it was pretty chaotic as people were still in and around him, directing questions, yelling, screaming. It was very chaotic. And you will get the opportunity to see part of that here shortly, as this whole incident was captured on video. Once officers arrived to assist Officer Barone was able to direct them to what had just occurred. They were able to secure the defendant who was on the porch, who still had access to the gun that he shot Officer Barone with. It was laying right next to him. It was later found to be a loaded 9mm handgun that had an additional 16 rounds of ammunition in it. So this person had the propensity to cause a tremendous amount of violence and damage that day, if not stopped by Officer Barone. After being secured on the porch, the defendant, Officer Barone, actually self-medicated himself, self-treated himself. He was able to use his own tourniquet, which he's trained to do and is supplied by the department. He was able to apply a tourniquet to his left arm because he was shot in his left forearm. He donned that piece of equipment, and then with the assistance of another officer, he was actually transported to the hospital for treatment. Just to add to the chaos, which he did not know at that time, as I said, there's people all around him. Directly behind Officer Barone, there was a vehicle, several kids in that vehicle. The direction that the defendant shot was in direct line with that vehicle as well. As I mentioned, Police Officer Barone was the officer involved in this situation. He's a 3-year veteran of the Middletown Police Department. He began his career with us in October 2017. He's 26 years old, and he's a resident born and raised here in the city of Middletown. He attended Middletown High School. His family is very deeply involved in the community, and he's very well known in and around the community. And as I also mentioned, we will see in the video shortly that it is very evident that Officer Barone's training kicked in that day. I can't say enough how proud I am of him, how he did an amazing job under the circumstances he was faced with. This was not like normal situations where an officer is dispatched to a call for service, where they're given information, respond to this location for this type of a situation. He didn't have time to prepare himself. He was waved down by someone asking for help, and within 25 seconds, he was in the fight for his life. After the situation was contained, we learned a little bit about our suspect or our defendant, who later became our defendant. Defendant is Deshaun Owens. He's a 29-year-old male from Bronx, New York. He's got an extensive criminal history. He's currently on parole for robbery. He has an active parole warrant for absconding from his parole officer. He came to 28 Myrtle Avenue that day unannounced. It wasn't a planned visit. He came there because that's the residence of his ex-girlfriend, who was there with her new current boyfriend. He came there with ill intent. As I said, he came there unannounced. It wasn't a planned visit. He came there armed with a gun, and immediately some type of confrontation arose in that residence. Fortunately enough, somebody there was able to wave down the passing police car, which again was Officer Barone, for assistance, and that's exactly what he did. He gave them assistance that day. And I truly believe, standing here before you today, that if not for Officer Barone driving by 28 Myrtle Avenue at 7:42 on August 29th, we may be dealing with many people that have either been killed or seriously injured by Mr. Owens. Based on the facts of this incident and the circumstances surrounding it, being that it is a police-involved shooting, here in Orange County, we have a protocol that's been in place for many years, in which whenever a police officer is involved in any type of a shooting incident, the investigation is conducted by the New York State Police and the Orange County District Attorney's Office. And that's exactly what is going on at this time in this situation. As soon as the scene was clear, we had a sergeant on the scene, Sergeant Evan Colon, who did an outstanding job directing his personnel to secure the scene, obtain witnesses, secure the witnesses, and hold that scene down securely until the state police and other resources arrived to start their investigation. Based on the circumstances of the situation, of this incident, yesterday, our defendant, Owens, was charged with several charges to include attempted murder. And shortly you'll hear from DA Hoovler, who will go more into detail in regards to those charges. In addition to the criminal investigation, which I mentioned is being conducted by New York State Police along with the Orange County District Attorney's Office, I, along with my administrative staff, by policy and procedure here in Middletown Police Department, will conduct an internal investigation into the circumstances surrounding this incident. We'll ensure that Officer Barone's actions that day were within the guidelines set forth in our department policy and procedure, and ensure that he followed all the protocol that are in place. And I could stand here before you today and say that given the facts that I'm aware of, as of now, I stand behind his actions 100%. I believe that he did everything as best that he could have done under those circumstances. On its face, I do not see any violations of department policy at this time. However, we will continue our investigation. It will be a complete and thorough investigation, and upon our conclusion, we will forward our investigation to our Civilian Police Commission for their review, and they will have the ultimate say to determine whether or not guidelines were followed. In closing, I'd also like to commend Officer Barone for the courage, bravery, and heroism that he showed on August 29th. As I said, I truly believe for his actions that day, several other people may have been injured or seriously injured, or if not killed. I'd also like to recognize and commend all of the officers that were involved in this incident that day. As I said, they secured the scene, obtained witnesses, did an amazing job rendering first aid, not only to Officer Barone, but to the defendant, and assisting with the other agencies to secure and move forward with this investigation. I'd also like to thank all of the law enforcement that came out and supported us that day. The Town of Wallkill Police, Orange County Sheriff's, New York State Police District Attorney, and we have a great working relationship with them, and we hope that continues. And it's circumstances like this that bring us all together, but it's a very unfortunate situation. With that, I'm going to turn it over to DA Hoovler. To Mayor DeStefano for some comments.
Thank you, thank you, Chief, and thank you for your leadership and that of your executive staff during this period. Thank God that Officer Evan Barone is recovering. Sam and Kathy, who are in the back, his parents, his family. Our thoughts and prayers from our community continue to flow in from all members of the surrounding communities and our city residents. Our police commission, our common council, our businesses, and other Hudson Valley communities as far away as Poughkeepsie have called and have expressed just how brave this young man was, and other elected officials. I want to thank Steve Newhouse also for being here, Miguel Rodriguez, our council president, DA Hoovler, and all the people that are here today to make this presentation. I would also like to thank the men and women of law enforcement for what they do daily. When you see the video that DA Hoovler will play, you will see what police officers potentially face on a daily basis when they leave their homes. This entire incident, as the chief said, took 25 seconds from the time they waved down his car and he left his vehicle. I've seen the social media slogan, "Come home safe." That is what their families look at and think about when their loved ones leave for work. Often home, injured, but safe. Many don't. There is a national discussion, and especially one here in New York State, about defunding of police. We know how this would have ended, as the chief stated, if Officer Barone was not there. This is also an opportunity to talk about that term, defund, and in my opinion, it's a foolish term both politically and in reality. It is a big city discussion that some have attempted to implement in small cities, New York, but here without success. But that decision potentially has grave consequences. Government budgets illustrate what the community's priorities are. You can fund mental health programs without defunding police. You can fund domestic violence programs without defunding police. Non-policing forms of public safety and community needs, such as social services, youth services, housing, and education, along with health care, are necessary, and we all realize that. But you do not need to defund police in order for them to have adequate funding for those other programs. Officer Evan Barone saved many lives this past Saturday. He stood there wounded and saved lives. He has been in Garnet Healthcare Facility since, family by his side. Sam and I grew up in the same neighborhood. We've been friends for many years. His commitment to our city as fire chief and his son's commitment to our city as a police officer, upholding the tradition of protect and serve has enabled our city residents to reap the benefits of his bravery, his instincts, and training. We are so proud of Officer Evan Barone. As the investigation continues, it is my hope that the suspect in custody will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and I will leave that in the capable hands of our DA, David Hoovler, District Attorney Hoovler. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Oh, go right ahead, Joe. There you go, no problem. In the world of mass. Thanks again, Mayor. I just want to add one little thing before we start, adding on to what the chief said. Officer Barone tourniqueted his own arm, and to show what kind of person he is, his parents, he walked into the hospital, which I find to be an incredible testament to his fortitude, to himself. He did not want to be carried or brought in. He wanted to walk in. Amazing story there. I'm going to start with what the mayor was talking about, defunding the police. Simply put, in our society, there is a place for this conversation to be had. It needs to be brought up in our communities. It needs to be talked about. And the communities need to understand that, as the mayor said, you can always put more money to youth services. You can always put more money to social services, to mental health. But the last thing anyone needs to do in Orange County is defund any of the police. Orange County is very diverse. We have over 31 municipal agencies, a county agency, the state. Over 40-some agencies police this county. In the state of New York, you got 932 towns, over 515 police departments, 66,000 officers. When you look at Orange County, what you see on national level is not necessarily true here. And I'll give you just an example. If you look at Middletown, Port Jervis, and Newburgh, they answer over 80,000 calls a year. They had about 30 complaints on their officers last year. Less than 10 were sustained against anyone. When you go countywide, that number drops. That number increases to almost 130,000 calls, and it remains roughly the same. What does all that say? It says that your leadership here, the chief, the mayor, the police commission, and by the way, in this community, you do have a police commission. There is civilian oversight to some extent over the police department. They do a very, very good job. And the public needs to understand that while we can have these conversations, the numbers that you see in Orange County do not bear out the national discussion. Still have that conversation. And I hope that we do, but I hope that we keep in mind that when I sat on a committee here, the chief stood up and said they had 43,000 calls. You had 9 complaints last year. If you were a tire manufacturer and that was your failure rate, you'd be the best tire manufacturer in the world. Fordham Business School would have you up everywhere. That goes to show you how well they police this community. So, again, defunding the police, in my opinion, not a good idea. Now, to this incident. As I said, as the chief said, the defendant in this case, Mr. Owens, has a lengthy criminal history. It involves violence. There was a violent felony parole warrant out for him on the day that this incident happened. I am pretty confident that the chief's description accurately reflects everything that happened that day. I intend to show you 3 video clips that were taken from a camera on a neighboring house that show the incident. The clips will be shown in their entirety. They all run together. The first clip is going to be a wide view of what happened. And I'm going to ask you to all direct your attention to the left side of the TV screens. Then you will see a narrower view will be the next play that focuses only on that left side of the TV. And then the final will be slow motion. In the slow motion, there is no audio. So you'll have audio on the first two, but no audio on the last. So, Lieutenant, if you would play the video now. Again, I'm directing your attention to the left side of the screen. Okay, now you're looking at a narrower view. I focus your attention again to the very left side of the screen. Can you stop it for a second, Jim? Okay, I just want to direct your attention. The officer is in the middle of the screen in the blue in front of the red vehicle. The suspect will appear very quickly from the left side of your screen on the porch. Now you're going to see a very slow motion. This is half speed. You can see the officer in the middle. And if you look to the immediate left of the screen, you'll see a hand come up from behind the gentleman that appears to have no shirt on. There it is. The officer's shot. He returns fire now. And you see the individuals in the red car who were directly in the line of fire from the suspect in this case.
That's where the kids were, right?
Yes. Okay, if we could turn the lights on and just leave that. I would note for the record at this point, the reason we are playing this video at this time is because the District Attorney's Office, our shooting protocol, we have 2 investigations that are going. We have 1 investigation that's going right now into the actions of the officer, and we have 1 investigation that's going right now into the prosecution of Mr. Owens. What I can tell you in the investigation into Officer Barone. Earlier today, my executive staff, we met. We have concluded our investigation. We have concluded that all the actions he took in this case were proper and necessary, and that under the laws of justification of our state, he was justified in everything that he did. It's a rare circumstance that we make that conclusion that fast, but we were able to do it. Most of my staff have worked over 20 hours in the last 2 days, going over hundreds of pages of documents and going over the available evidence. So at this point, that investigation is concluded. There will be a written report on that when the prosecution aspect of this case, Mr. Owens' case, is over in court. As the chief said, Mr. Owens was charged yesterday with basically in a criminal complaint with 2 charges. However, those will not be the only charges he'll be charged with. He was charged with attempted first-degree murder of a police officer. It carries a minimum sentence of 20 to life, as well as criminal possession of a firearm, which is a lower crime. But again, the minimum he faces in this case is 20 to life. The maximum would be 40 to life. And again, I've indicated that he does have an extensive record. I would note at this time for the record that even though we have this video evidence, even though that we are here today, under our Constitution, under our law, Mr. Owens is presumed innocent until or unless he pleads guilty or is found guilty by a jury of his peers. What this video really shows the public is how fast things happen. And I just want to note something that the video shows that consistently the media twists and doesn't get correct. In this particular incident, Officer Barone, when he was notified that there was a gun, he did have his gun out, and he was prepared to defend himself. The suspect, however, at that point, had his gun also. The suspect decided he was going to shoot first. And in that scenario, under the dynamics of armed encounters as police officers are trained, there's a common phrase. It's called action beats reaction. Once the suspect decided to fire, there was no possible way that Officer Barone could have fired first in that scenario because the body and the mind does not react fast enough. That is the things that our police officers face every day out on the street. In this particular incident, but for the grace of God, more people could have been injured or could have been killed. I agree with the chief that the officer in this case did an amazing job of not only protecting himself, but of reacting under pressure, continuing to react under pressure, and sure, something no one's mentioned, he placed himself between that vehicle full of children and the shooter. And we can only assume at this point that that was done for a purpose, and I commend him for that. The prosecution, where it goes from here, the defendant's charged. Again, attempted first-degree murder of a police officer. He's been arraigned. He has been remanded. When he is released from the hospital, he will go to the Orange County Jail, and he will face a prosecution. A grand jury is waiting this week, hearing the evidence on the case, and we would expect to hear an indictment come up sometime in the near future. But as I close, I hope the public understands policing a free society is extremely difficult. Policing a free society where within 25 seconds of getting out of your car you're fired upon, that's even more difficult. But considering all of that, you still have to educate yourself to what an amazing job the police officers and departments do in Orange County. And that's not to say that they're not human, that they don't make mistakes, or that they don't act improperly at times. Like anything, that is going to happen. But we have to get away from these narratives that just because one police officer makes a mistake or they're bad, all of them are bad. That is simply not the case here. It's not the case in America. And we need to make sure that we don't let that narrative come into not funding in this county. On that note, I will turn it back over to Chief Awanchu.
Captain, do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, Chief, I don't.
County Exec, anything you'd like to add?
I'll be 30 seconds. I just want to reiterate, it's been said, the professionalism of this police department here in Middletown. They've been transparent, they've been honest, and they've been forthright to the public. My first concern, and I talked to the mayor and I talked to the police department Saturday night when this was unfolding, was the officer safety. So I know that mom and dad are here. So obviously our county thanks you for your son's incredible service. But my second thing was to make sure that Orange County doesn't become a victim like these other counties and cities across America. And that's because of the professionalism, Chief, that you have instilled, and obviously with the city of Middletown, I couldn't be prouder to serve with both of you guys in public service. The DA, myself, the state police, everybody working together, supporting you guys. So a job well done, and a speedy recovery to Officer Barone. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions?
Chief, what was the distance between the shooter and the officer? Was it like 10 feet?
I'd say 25 feet approximately, but I remember we are not doing the investigation into the crime scene, so that's just by my observations looking at the video.
Chief, who was yelling, "I'm a federal officer"?
I personally don't know that. There's some discrepancies. There is some belief that it is the person, Owens, that who was shot, but we don't have confirmation on that.
So you think he was trying to deflect the officer's intentions with his gun out because he was announcing that he was a federal officer?
That's a possibility, but I cannot confirm that.
He shot from the porch, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
I don't know if you'd be able to answer this question, or perhaps Mr. Hubler is available to answer the question, but after the officer fired at the suspect, what did the suspect do? Did he fall to the ground? Did he stay, in place? I know it's not confirmed that he was the one yelling that he's a federal officer.
Yes, to my understanding, he fell down to the porch. He was still moving around, and the weapon was still in immediate proximity to him.
Weapon was recovered from him.
And the other people at the scene, do we know who they were? I know that you referenced that several people came out to the responding officer and that it was chaotic.
Yes, we do know who they are, yes.
Were they friends of the suspect? Were they friends of the victim?
To my knowledge, they're all friends of the resident of 28 Myrtle Avenue. We do have them identified. Many of them are being very cooperative with the investigation as well.
And was he menacing the people within the house with the firearm or threatening them? Can you go into the actual domestic violence incident that allegedly occurred there?
I can't at this time.
Did the people in the house know that he had a gun?
I'm not aware of that.
Did any of the people on the porch attempt to try to stop him or warn the police officer that there was somebody there that should not have been there?
Actually, let me go back to your first question. Yes, someone did know that he had a gun because as Officer Barone is trying to sort through the circumstances, someone says he's got a gun and he's got to go. And your second question?
The second question was, did anybody on that porch attempt to either warn the officer that somebody had a gun, or did they do anything to try to stop the man with the gun?
I don't believe the man, but as I indicated just a moment ago, that someone did say he has a gun and he has to go.
Thank you.
Yes, Rachel.
What's the condition of the officer and the suspect as of now?
The officer is, he has to undergo surgery. He still is in the medical facility. And the defendant is also in a medical facility. And from what I understand, he's in stable condition.
Do we know where he was shot in his body?
I'm not at liberty to say that at this time.
Did his vest protect him in any way?
Our officer was shot in the arm, so therefore the vest does not cover the arm.
It does say in your press release, though, that he was struck in the lower body and the head.
That is accurate.
That's what you
Yeah. Any other questions?
Is the officer expected to be capable to return to duty once he's recovered?
I'm very hopeful. He is a young officer. He's very energetic. I'm super hopeful that he's going to be able to return and fulfill his career because it's a passion of his to be a police officer and serve the community that he was born and raised in. Any other questions? Thank you.
Can you play that video again?
Sure. It's up to, are you okay with that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's fine.